This is FRM Part 2, Book 3, Operational Risk and Resiliency, and the chapter on Cyber Resilient Organization. This chapter is taken from a book called Solving Cyber Risk, Protecting Your Company and Society, and was written by three gentlemen who have lots of experience in the cyber industry, either as consultants or running their own security firms or through the educational process. But what I found interesting in the first couple of pages of the chapter was an emphasis on perimeter and securing the perimeter. And when I read that, I couldn't help but think of those old Jason Bourne movies. Whenever Matt Damon goes into a building and the CIA knows where he is, the CIA director always says, "I want to secure one block border around this building." Now, of course, the way that relates to our discussion on cybersecurity is that, a one block perimeter around our building really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, really, we need a global perimeter. And so the emphasis here in this chapter is on not just the organization, but society benefits as well. I also want to call your attention to one example that was given in those first couple of pages about a jet that was that had a mid-air collision with another airplane. This was an F-15, and the pilot was spinning out of control. And he was interviewed afterward, and he said something like, "My first instinct was to hit the ejector button so that I could get out and have my parachute and land safely." But then his training kicked in, and he started hitting all these buttons, and he was able to land the airplane on the runway without any damage to himself or more damage to the airplane. It really was a feat of genius. And what these authors call this is an effective man-machine partnership, where this pilot had tremendous training, so he knew what buttons to press and all that kind of good stuff. But also the construction of the plane, is that called aerodynamics or something like that? I mean, of course, I don't know how to make airplanes, or I'm not an engineer, but it sounds an awful lot like to me that when the pilot was pressing the buttons, that the airplane reacted in the right manner so that the two of them, this man-machine partnership, could land the jet successfully. And I get the sense here as reading and rereading this chapter that that's our goal here. A man-machine partnership to prevent cyber attacks on our organization. And you'll see this in these learning objectives. So just three of them. Describe elements of an effective cyber resilience framework. All right, so there's that word resilience. Let me go back here. Look, this book 3 has that word resiliency in it. So it makes perfect sense that, boy, look at the first one and then the second learning objective, explain resilient security approaches, and then we'll explain some methods in here. So the general focus here is probably this could be summarized into one big old learning objective that sounds something like, hey, let's make sure our organization is resilient to these types of attacks. So let's go ahead and define resilience and what all that means for our organization. Resilient, that word simply means the ability to respond and to maintain health from some kind of an adverse event. So look at that first block point there. Ability to prepare for, that's important, respond to, and then recover from cyber attacks. So there's a three-pronged part of this definition in this term cyber resilience. It helps an enterprise to manage a cyber attack or a data breach while still being able to function in all of its other business operations. Remember, I give you this image of a financial institution having two clients walk into the building. One wants to borrow some money, the other one wants to invest some of his or her own capital. So we have different business units here that are going to address the needs of those two specific clients. But we need to be able to accomplish those objectives even in the face of some kind of a cyber attack in the background. Look at that third block point. Traditional cybersecurity measures are no longer effective. And there's a report that, about a third of organizations report some kind of a loss And so this is not some small part of the business. And this swings back to what we've been talking about. A theme that I've been talking about inside of these series of chapters is that you have this umbrella over the top, and you have the chief risk officer, and that man or woman has to be in charge of everything, going down all the way to the bottom. Yeah, no longer a matter of if, but when, of course. All organizations know that they're going to be attacked sooner or later. But let's go ahead and get into some of the specifics of that first learning objective. And I'm guessing that you guys are aware of these just because you have computers at home. And it's not like you have a computer at home, that you just bought in the last 6 months. I mean, we're now at least, 20 years. I bought my first computer when I was working on my dissertation in 1991 or 1992, whenever that was. So 30 years of home computing, so we know about these things. We know about email spoofing. We know about phishing. We know about all this kind of stuff. And so those colored boxes in the outside of key areas of focus, they're probably a part of your personal lives, and I'm guessing they're probably a part of your professional lives as well. Now let's get specifically into that first learning objective, elements of an effective cyber resilience framework. And what we've done on this slide is we've kind of color-coded them, so we go from blue all the way over to, you guys remember, I can't really tell what those colors are, kind of red, purple, dark blue, and then kind of a little bit less red. But it's almost like a chronology. So we first want to identify, and then protect, and then detect, respond, and recover. But from my perspective, from where I'm sitting as I'm reading this chapter, I get the sense that there can be loops going back. In order to recover, of course, you have to identify first, and then in order to protect, you have to identify. So everything starts in the beginning of identifying the risks and the vulnerabilities as they relate to individuals, our systems, our assets, and all of our contacts. So that identify, clearly that's the beginning, but then we're going to loop all the way back, because once we install defenses to protect, and once we train, we're basing that on a dynamic environment in which these risks and vulnerabilities are changing. So our protection has to be continuously updated. And then, of course, once we protect, then we have to detect what those incidents are occurring before they cause substantial damage. And then we need an immediate response. Let me swing back to that jet fighter pilot, right? What could he or she have done? Ejected, but then disaster on the earth, right? So we need a quick response. We need to know exactly what our response, and we need to train. And so this goes back to the board of directors and the senior leadership in our risk culture of training everybody. And now cyber security and cyber risk is another element of all of that training. And then the final spot there is to recover. Of course, being able to recover from that event, which will depend on our ability to detect it and respond. So what we could have done in this slide is probably drawn some arrows and flow charts between and among each of these, but I'm guessing for exam purposes that if you remember these in like a chronology across like we've presented it here, that's probably sufficient. How about ways to improve our cyber resilience? So this is what I said just a moment ago, adaptive technology. So these are dynamic events that occur regularly. So we need to enhance and optimize man-machine interface. Boy, that sounds really cool. Regular training, we've talked about this multiple times. And then these bottom two here, there are some really fascinating examples in this chapter. Let me go ahead and start with gamification. This is an interesting concept that actually got started in the marketing industry, where brand managers would try to develop a game to get consumers to purchase their product line. I remember when I was a little dude and McDonald's first came out, they used to have a game where you went and you bought a Big Mac and you got a little thing and you put it on a card, and when you got all of the spaces filled up, you went in and you got a free French fries or something, so you try to increase that demand. And what this means for cyber resilience here is to put the organization in a game framework so that you can play a game between and among all of employees, saying things like, hey, look, when you see something like this, you have to report it in this manner and you get a point. And then your name will go at the top at the end of the week. It'll say Jim 7 points, and then it'll say Betty 4 points, and then it'll say Roger 9 points, or whatever it is. And so you make it a game so that people inside of the culture are thinking about this kind of stuff and then playing a game to improve their effectiveness. Now, nudging behavior, the example in the textbook is really kind of comical, and I do want to share it with you, but first let me just go ahead and warn you, we're all adults here, so this is going to be an adult conversation. So this nudging behavior, look at the bolded, promotes voluntary dialogue. So the example given in the chapter is one of restaurants in trying to improve hygiene in the bathrooms designed for men. All right, bear with me. I'm not making this up. You put a target in the urinal so that there's promoting a better hygiene so that it doesn't go everywhere. And so you put a target in there and it brings elements of a game. Like you can play a game to try to hit the target, so then it goes down into all the pipes and doesn't spread germs. So this is a really cool thing, nudging behavior, trying to nudge employees to promote good hygiene, or in this case, good cyber resilience attitude. Now, as I was reading this, I couldn't help but think of Frank Drebin in those great Naked Gun movies. There's a really funny scene where he's in the men's restroom. And so when you get to this question on the exam, I want you to think back at Frank in that funny scene in the movie, and I promise you that will kind of free up your mind if you have a little bit of a comedy element while you're taking the exam, because, boy, it's a lot of pressure sitting there for hundreds of hours trying to remember all this stuff. Anyway, I enjoyed that example, and I know some of you don't read the chapter, so I wanted to share that with you. All right, on to more serious stuff here. How about attributes of a cyber resilient organization? This makes perfect sense here, right? Flexibility, preparedness, a learning culture, and that learning culture goes all the way back to the board of directors and senior leadership. Awareness and commitment and just culture. And I want to emphasize that the just culture, it encourages the reporting of some of these incidences, but the reporting is not really trying to be like a tattletale or anything. It's trying to say, okay, I found something. It's not really your fault. It's not really your fault, but I found something, and that it might lead to some kind of a breach. How about cyber resilience objectives? All right, so adaptive responses. Develop a range of actions that can be taken depending on the particulars of a cyber attack, right? A data breach versus some kind of spyware that is put onto our clients so that the cyber attacker is retrieving information about our clients. Analytic monitoring, analyze data on an ongoing basis. Of course, this is all a function of big data and being able to take all of these inputs and make some sense out of them. Coordinated defense should not conflict with each other, of course, and they should work toward a unified goal, meaning that this coordinated defense, whatever this is, that it doesn't conflict with the other goals of the organization, which sound an awful lot like maximizing shareholder wealth. Deception, I like this one. Create confusion for the attackers, and I can't help but think of Tom Cruise in those Mission Impossible movies, right? Every movie he's attacking some kind of a computer system, and so they have all these things, and he hangs and he crawls and he jumps and he climbs and he does all that kind of stuff, and in doing it they create confusion so that they can be undetected. So we need to develop those tools. Privileges should be limited, of course. Random changes. I love this idea that we change your password every day. I get that at school. Every month I get an email saying you haven't changed your password in a month. So safety, control, backup, segmentation, and then integrity. Of course, these are great cyber resilient objectives. Let's move to that second learning objective. Approaches. Resilient software, resilient to help the organization withstand an attack. I'm guessing that you guys have some software on your home computers and maybe on your phones and your iPads and whatever else, and you get these emails all the time. Hey, somebody was knocking at your door, but we threw them out, right? Minimizing intrusion dwell time. Of course, there has to be a short time period, maybe like that, right? I don't know if it's that quick, but it's almost that quick between the first time of the attack and the point where it is detected and then managed and handled. Bayesian inference techniques. We've talked about this, I think, at some point during our visits. Remember, this Bayesian models are used to estimate, some kind of a probability, but it deals with uncertainty inside of the model and uncertainty outside of the model. Mock attacks are launched by a sponsored hacker. Lots of movies out there do this, where the beginning of the movie is, hey, all right, here's somebody, they break in, and then they show up undetected. They show up and say, oh, hey, look, this is what we did, and this is how we're going to save you money. Make sure you pay me a lot. Financial consequences. These are obvious notions here. Loss of intellectual property and other confidential information. Denial of service attacks, physical damage, corrupted files, and there are some examples, and I'm guessing you guys have your own. Now, how about preparing for financial loss? So we need to perform a risk analysis, right? Determine the probability and severity of loss, and this, of course, relates to how much of a buffer do we need to maintain an adequate measure of liquidity. Look at that third one there. I like this. Establish cyber insurance. I'm all in favor of transferring risk, right? We have all this risk, so there's got to be an insurance company out there that will say, look, if you pay me X amount of dollars every month, then I'll make certain to, make you whole again if you suffer some kind of a financial loss. Emergency funding channels. Explore cost control measures. Of course, these are kind of coupled here. So think about, emergency funding channels. Those are kind of right-hand side of the balance sheet things. Explore cost control measures. These are kind of left-hand side of the income state measures. So you have a combination of stuff that shows up on the financial statements that are going to help prepare to manage those losses. How about increasing financial resilience? All right, reverse stress testing. I like this one here. Establish just how big an attack would be needed to cause a total financial collapse of the organization. And I thought that was interesting that the chapter emphasized a total financial collapse. I'm always interested in, kind of a bell-shaped curve. Total would be way, way over on the right or left-hand side, however you want to define it. But I'm also interested in all of those other collapses, that are a little bit less than total. Enterprise risk management. I like this one because it involves computing some kind of a cyber value at risk. Now, we've talked at length about how cool value at risk is, but we also talked about its limitations. And so we're going to use the benefits and the costs of value at risk and apply it to the cyberspace. Carry out counterfactual analysis. Oh my gosh. So we have the potential benefits of security enhancements. We have, of course, the costs associated with this. And this goes to our simple marginal cost, marginal benefit analysis. Implement a defense in-depth IT structure, so multiple layers. That makes a lot of sense. At our school, we have multiple layers. Like if I do something and then somebody else does something and then somebody else, and then we're just kicked in and then we're kicked out. Invest in cyber risk security education. This, of course, is all part of the training that we've emphasized in these last few chapters. And then, of course, after some kind of an incident or some kind of a cyber event, then we need to go back and look at our models and look at our system and then probably fix it, right? Should be rebuilt and improved. And that takes us through these learning objectives for the cyber resilient organization. Remember what I said to start this slide deck off. I'm looking at these learning objectives, and the commonality in there is that word resilient. And so I'm guessing that those questions on an exam would come from that word.